50 months in prison. That is 50 months in prison. Far less than the 11 years requested, far more than the 14 months. He will not walk out of the door behind me in the courtroom today. He will not be a free man for 50 months.
New York, we're coming back on the air because the judge has just sentenced Sean Diddy Combs to 4 years in prison. He was found guilty over the summer on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution in connection with his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura and another woman, but was acquitted on more serious charges that could have sent him to prison for life. Let's get right to our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky, who's been following this trial from the beginning. He joins us from outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. So, Aaron, we just got the verdict right there. We know that Combs himself spoke to the judge. The judge responded. Lay out the sentencing here and what went down in the courtroom today.
She said he has to stay.
This was a very long sentencing hearing, which Sean Combs himself, once larger than life, was left begging for mercy, standing at the defense table, telling the judge that he's a changed man, apologizing for his behavior. But that request for a lenient sentence of time served was rejected by the judge, Arun Subramanian, who said it was insufficient to send the kind of message that he wanted to send, that violence against women must be met with real accountability. And so he sentenced Sean Combs to 4 years in prison. That's not as much as federal prosecutors here wanted. They wanted 11 years in prison, reminding the judge that Sean Combs has a penchant for violence and abuse, pointing to 2016 hotel security video showing Combs attacking Cassie Ventura. Combs says he knows that video intimately. He apologized to Cassie Ventura. The judge said 11 years was unreasonable, but 4 years is just the right amount, the judge said, to send a message to Sean Combs, to victims of domestic violence, that their accounts will be taken seriously. Whit?
Aaron, thanks. Let's go ahead and bring in a trial attorney and ABC News legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, we just heard Aaron lay out right there that the defense was hoping for 14 months in credit for time served. The prosecution wanted 11 years. So this is somewhere in the middle. Is this verdict what you expected?
It actually was not what I expected, and this is why I say that. The probation report said anywhere from 70 to 87 months, much higher than the 50 months that the judge gave. And understand, and I'll try to break down the math as best as I can, the judge understands the math of how this all works. With 50 months in the federal system, you only do 85% of that. So you take away about 8 months or so, that's 42 months. And don't forget that Sean Combs has already been sitting in MDC, the jail here in Brooklyn, New York, for 13 months. So you subtract 13 months even from that, you're looking at something like 2 years, maybe 3 years at the end of the day. The judge knew that and still gave this sentence. I think if you're Sean Combs and his defense team, a hard day, but overall a win for them.
Okay, Brian, stand by for us. So let's bring in criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor and ABC News legal contributor, Bernarda Villalona. And Bernarda, we also saw today some emotional testimony. We saw numerous children of Sean Diddy Combs speaking before the court. Combs himself saying that he's a changed man. There was this video that they put together talking about Combs being a family man, his impact on the community. How much of that do you think made a difference here in the judge's decision?
Well, today was definitely Judgment Day for Sean Diddy Combs. So what the judge told Sean Diddy Combs was like, look, in terms of your life work, of all the good you've done, in terms that you're a great father, it doesn't erase what I heard and what I saw during this 8-week trial. And what he heard and saw during this 8-week trial was one of Sean Diddy Combs taking advantage of Jane and Cassie by being violent to them, taking advantage of their emotions, having them engage in several sex acts, either by drugs or alcohol or by the manipulation. And the judge sent a message that, yes, you have family, yes, you have people that love you, but Jane and Cassie were victims, and victims should be accounted for, and someone should speak for the victims and deter this type of conduct. And that's why the judge didn't go with the 14th month recommendation by the defense, but instead handed down a sentence of 50 months, 4 years and 2 months, to show that this is accountability, this is deterrence, this is protecting the public, and this is what the verdict is going to be today. And when people remember Sean Diddy Combs, they know that he is a convicted felon sentenced to 50 months for his actions throughout a decade on women.
And Lisa France, I'd like to talk to you for a second about kind of the big picture of what this means, because as we've been covering this, we saw the judge touch on, and we saw the defense talk about what Sean Diddy Combs' contributions, positive contributions, have been to society. Obviously, during the trial, we talked quite a bit about the negative contributions that he is now being held to account for. But what is this going to mean for the millions of people who have been following this trial? What more does it say about where we are?
Well, Casey, because of the positive contributions, it's the reason why so many people feel so very strongly about this. Having seen the video, having heard the testimony, it is a huge disappointment to a lot of his fans, because this is a man who has had a career that has spanned music and fashion and restaurants and spirits. I mean, he was someone that, as they like to say, got it out the dirt, you know, came from the hood and really elevated himself as a young man who, you know, went to Howard University and would jump on the train and go back to New York City and work as an intern, and worked his way up from an intern to founding his own record label. And Bad Boy Records, I mean, it was the soundtrack for so many people's youth. So when you saw what was alleged against Sean Combs, and then when you followed this trial, it was a complete and utter devastating disappointment to a lot of his fans who expected much more of him. Now, I've said this before on air, for those of us who have covered him for years, this was not a surprise, these allegations. We had heard rumors, we have heard people saying that they were afraid of him, that, you know, he had a lifestyle that not everybody would approve of. And so I think now, hearing the verdict, there are going to be some people who absolutely continue to support him. There are still people, even having seen the video, who say that, you know, Cassie Ventura was someone who, you know, participated. And but also there are people who say that it's absolutely disgusting. And I thought it was interesting that Sean Combs used that word when he was referencing the videotape. He said that it was disgusting, you know, and he appeared in his remarks to try to take ownership, to also try to sound contrite. But at the same time, you know, to Laura's point, he was very careful about not saying anything that might cause a problem when he tries to, you know, get back into court and get this revisited, you know, by appealing this. So, you know, I think that we're always going to have a split. That's always the case when you have things like this. Today is the 30th anniversary of the acquittal of O.J. Simpson. And while these are two very different cases, we're still having conversations about what it means when you have a successful, famous Black defendant in these cases. Can they really get a fair trial? You know, are people going to view them differently? Will he be able to have the type of life that he could have, you know, after he gets out? And so, you know, these conversations continue. It's very historic. And, you know, I had plenty of people hitting me up earlier today saying, you know, what's your over under? What do you think? Do you think he's going to be able to, you know, maybe just get out in a couple of months? Do you think he's going to get years? I think at the end of the day, people just, you know, some people wanted to see justice, and some people thought, much like I think Mr. Combs thought, that after he was acquitted of the more serious charges, that he was going to be walking out of that courtroom and heading back home to Miami and going back to, you know, the lifestyle in some ways that he enjoyed before. Not the dark parts that we heard about, but absolutely the fame, the fortune, and the being a celebrity.
Yeah, well, and we're also just learning here that the judge imposed the maximum $500,000 fine against Combs here. And Laura Coates, can you help us understand from a legal point of view? Obviously, there will be a process that continues on here. Assume there will be an appeal. I mean, how much of more time do we expect, based on the sentence, that he'll spend in prison?
He has been serving some time in the jail, not a federal prison. It's a holding over location in anticipation of trial and, of course, of sentencing, which means that the time he has served under the auspices, of course, of the Bureau of Prisons will be applied to the sentence he has. He also can have the benefit of some sorts of federal programming for somebody who is having their first official sentence, and good time served, et cetera, good behavior, participation, in a number of programs geared at going against recidivism, a fancy legal way of saying you're not to do crimes again. That will all be factored into his overall sentence. But they talked about the resources that are going to have been available to him. That's why he has that penalty of $500,000. We're talking about a man with an empire that was worth more, $500 million or more. That's a very important point, because had they convicted him on RICO, the government's hands come out. They want the money that could be associated with anything to do with a crime related to an enterprise. That went away, but he's still